Welcome to the show. Music soothes the savage beast, does a lot of things. It's moving, it's emotional. Sometimes music is vexing. Ultimately, music is a mystery. Today's guest is one of the greats, American choral composer Morten Lauridsen, right here on The Patrick Coffin Show, starting right now. Indeed, my guest today is Morten Lauridsen. He was named an American Choral Master by the National Endowment for the Arts. In the year 2007, he received the National Medal of Arts from the President in a White House ceremony. He's been a professor of composition at the University of Southern California's Thornton School of Music for more than 40 years, and his incredible music has been recorded on more than 200 CDs, including 5 Grammy Award nominations. From Lux Eterna to O Manu Mysterium and everything in between, his exquisite choral arrangements have been sung and loved throughout the world. It's a great honor to welcome Morten Lauridsen. Hello there.
Hello there. I'm pleased to talk to you this morning about music.
Well, I want to honor our mutual friend Dana Gioia, who put me in touch with your wonderful work. So I want to thank Dana for making that connection as well. And maybe start with something I've noticed about your music, Morten, and that is how often you like to pair your musical compositions with poetry, whether it's James Agee or Dana Gioia's own work or Rilke. Was that something that you developed early on, that you wanted to set certain pieces of poetry to music?
I read poetry every day. I've taught at USC now for more than 50 years, and almost every class I've started with a poem. It elevates it in so many ways, as you know. Poetry teaches us about life. We can bathe in the luxury of great verbiage, such as Dana Gioia, my dearest friend and also the current poet laureate of the state of California. But this is the springboard for my compositions. I read it constantly. I read poetry constantly, and I seek out those poems that, first of all, I have a visceral reaction to. It strikes me very, very deep, and very deeply inside. And these are the poets that I have chosen, the poems I've chosen, speak to the human condition. And I have chosen some of the greatest poets that ever walked the planet: Rilke, Robert Graves, Pablo Neruda, Lorca, James Agee, and the Sure on the Shining Knife. And I chose poems that not only speak to me, but to speak to all of us, that deal with life in so many ways, of love or loss of love, of kindness, of illumination, such as in the Lux Eterna, poetry that's highly symbolic. The winter theme in 2 of my cycles, the combination and the dichotomy of birth and death and cold and warm and all of these kinds of things that inform us. And so I seek out poetry. I'm constantly reading poems every single day. And I choose those poems in a variety of languages. And that actually caught me quite off guard, because I'm not a linguist. But I simply get together at the university with those who are, because I enjoy setting the poems in the original language, be it French, Italian, Latin, Spanish, as well as English.
What qualifies as a great poem for you? Because I'm sure you pour through a lot of, B-list stuff as well. Is there something about a given poem that leaps out because of its theme, or just the reputation of its author?
It's a combination of a number of things. The great poem that I set by Dana Gioia, called Prayer, is a very, very, very good example of that, where the verbiage itself is elegant, and the underlying themes. I'd be glad to read that short poem to your audience if you'd like. I've said that.
Dana's been a guest on the show, and I always love revisiting anything he's written. Do you want to read Prayer?
I'll read Prayer, and I want your audience to bask in the verbiage of this man, and I'll give you a little bit of background. Let me reach over and grab it, as well as my glasses to read it. Now, as a bit of background, Dana Gioia, also your listeners should know, was the National Artistic Spokesman for 7 years. He was chair of the National Endowment for the Arts.
Yeah.
And he did so much for this country in that particular role. He is now my colleague at the University of Southern California as a professor of poetry and public policy. Over 30 years ago, Dana and his wife lost their firstborn son to SIDS, sudden death syndrome, at 4 months. The cause of that is still unknown. There are lots of theories about that, but this is an affliction that is not all that rare. There are thousands of people that have lost over the years their child to this. Now, Dana wrote a poem that I set to music that is on the new album. It'll be the premiere broadcast, the premiere recording of Prayer that I set for chorus and piano. And this is the kind of the level of poetry that I'm looking for. Dana presents at the very beginning of this poem a series of images, and they are all slightly dark, slightly off-putting, and you have no idea really where he's going with this poem. Where he's going is this. Later on, he's asking whatever is out there, be it God, spirits, nature, whatever, to watch over his little boy for him. This is Prayer by Dana Gioia that I set to music. Echo of the clock tower, footstep in the alleyway, sweep of the wind sifting the leaves, jeweler of the spider web, connoisseur of autumn's opulence, blade of lightning harvesting the sky, keeper of the small gate, choreographer of entrances and exits, midnight whisper traveling the wires, seducer, healer, deity, or thief, I will see you soon enough, in the shadow of the rainfall, in the brief violet, darkening a sunset. But until then, I pray, watch over him, as a mountain guards its covert oar, and the harsh falcon, its flightlets young. Now that is a superb poem on so many levels, and it deeply touched me. And I set it to music in 3 different ways. First of all, as a solo song for my dear colleague at USC, the opera star, Mr. Gilfrey, Rod Gilfrey, and then as a duet, which is recorded on the Prayer album that I have done with Jeremy Hugh Williams in Cardiff, Wales, and then as a choral work. But I seek out poets like this. I've said a lot of Rilke. Rilke. I go to Rilke for imagination. And I set the Rose poems by him. In the last 2 years of his life, he lived in Museau, Switzerland, and wrote nothing but French poems. And I wrote a number of poems based upon roses. I've set other works by him. Rilke forces you to use your imagination as a reader.
Morten, how is his first name pronounced? Rainer?
Rainer Maria Rilke.
Rainer Maria Rilke.
That's right. For example, here's a 2 couplets by this man. Rilke describes memory as something that once pierced through us. Rilke now sits nearby. Memory now sits nearby with her hair all undone.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, every time I hear a great poem, one that stands the test of time, it's that each rereading of it or rehearing of it brings not less but more. Like I've read Prayer many times, but just the way you rendered it there, I was taken by how dark it is, how the harsh falcon and the kind of noir-esque feel to it, and yet it doesn't. There's a musicality to it, even though it's not music, literally.
That's right. I set as a couplet on my nocturnes poems about night in 3 different languages: French by Rilke, Neruda in Spanish, and Sure on the Shiny Night in English. And I said as an epilogue this 2-liner by Rilke: I said it in French, but the translation is, night has come. For one whole day again, I have loved you so much. Stirring hills. It's beautiful to see, but to feel in the lining of closed eyelids the sweetness of having seen. I approach poetry the same way as I do music. I admire those composers where you can take a work of music and keep peeling it back layer by layer by layer, and each time you do, it reveals something else. Isn't this true of Bach or Brahms or the great composers, Beethoven, of course?
Do you remember the first time you were really shaken by a piece of music, that you were kind of taken apart by it and put back together?
I look back on my early childhood, and I think this might surprise you, but the genre of music that deeply affected me as a young boy growing up in Portland, Oregon, were the music of the great Broadway stage, the music of Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein, and Cole Porter and Jerome Kern.
Yeah.
The combination of the lyric and music. This is part of our DNA as Americans. This is quintessentially American music and has heavily influenced me. Look at the lyricism in the great songs of the Broadway stage. And that has affected me deeply. I think one of the things I'm known for is the long lyric line. And you sure find that in pieces like Sure on This Shining Night and others of mine, where I learned from those wonderful craftsmen about the beauty and the elegance of a long lyric line. And I have found the same thing true in the songs of, say, Schubert or Schumann or Brahms, or the 20th century composers Ned Rorem or Aaron Copland or Sam Barber. These have been great inspirations to me. The combination of great poems, elegant melodic lines, and themes that touch the listener deeply.
I was thinking of the name Moss Hart as well.
Yes.
Forgotten by so many younger folks today. Stephen Sondheim, Bernstein, all those post-World War II Broadway. Well, they were balladeers too, weren't they?
Yes. Well, and I often go to Doylestown, Pennsylvania. I've got a choir there that does my music, and I stay at Oscar Hammerstein's home.
You do?
It's now a B&B, and I stay in the Kenai room, and it's so wonderful walking through that place. They still have his original typewriter there and pictures of him. But look, you walk around the room there, and what do you hear? Younger than springtime are you, or this nearly was mine, or oh, what a beautiful morning, or showboat. You see, I feel I'm in hallowed halls when I'm back there.
There's something about place, isn't there? There's this sort of mysterious thing. I know in a little town called Julian in Southern California, there's a place called the Julian B&B where C.S. Lewis stayed. It's a little plaque, and you think, the great man was here. He trod these boards here. Just incidentally for listeners, my interview with Dana Joy is episode number 26. Dana was one of my first endorsers, so that was an interview on the great poetry revival. So was there a time, you remember, I'm sure it wasn't a Tuesday you woke up and said, I'm going to devote my life to music, but maybe there was. Did you learn early on that you were going to go all in with this, composing and creating music for others to love as you have loved the creations of the people you just mentioned?
Actually, no. It's an unusual story, I think. Growing up in Oregon, I studied piano at an early age. That was always part of my upbringing. I played jazz and classical. I played in dance bands. I love that. I also picked up the trumpet and played in bands and also dance bands. I love that very much. Now, I always thought at that time, and I'd written no music at all, I just was a performer. I had thought at that time that music would be a wonderful hobby avocation for me. And I went off to Whitman College in the state of Washington, a very fine liberal arts college, and I took no music at all my very first year. Now, in the summer between high school and then going to Whitman, I worked for the Forest Service. I fought fires. I was a fireman in the fighting fires. And then I asked for and was granted a post on a lookout. This was a life-changing episode for me. The lookout was in a very remote area in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, not far from Mount St. Helens, on a tower. I was up on that lookout for 10 weeks alone. I came down one day to get some supplies. And other than infrequent visits by someone to the ranger to resupply my grub up there, I was there alone. And this was, now I'm 19 years old. And I did a lot of self-reflection and in the quietness up there. And I came to the conclusion that music needed to be a much larger part of my life. I missed it desperately. So I went back to Whitman College. I took every music class that I could, theory and piano and sang in the choir, etc. And I decided that if I were to be in music, that I should go to where I would have the opportunity to hear many concerts in a larger urban area. And many people had recommended the University of Southern California to me. And I actually flew down and attended classes. And I thought that I would come down here and trust the faculty of this great school of music to help me sort out what my pathway was musically. Up to this point, I had not written any music. But I set up a meeting on that trip with the great composer and author, who also wrote the first book on Bartok, Halsey Stevens, who was head of the composition department, and I met with him. And I said, Dr. Stevens, I'm coming down here, and I'm exploring what I want to do musically. I have not composed. I would like to take a class in composition. And he asked for my portfolio, and since it didn't exist, he said to me that for those taking classes in composition at the college level, that there's a vetting process, and the faculty looks at their previous work, etc., to get in. But he then said to me, and I will forever be grateful, he said, young man, you're coming a long way. You're a good musician. I've heard you play the piano. I had the Brahms E-flat Rhapsody in my finger at that time. I preferred for him. He said, I'll tell you what, I will give you 1 semester in a beginning composition class. Now, mind you, I'm a junior in college, to see if you can cut it or not. And I thanked him for that. And I wrote my very first pieces when I was 20 years old in this class. Within 2 years, I had a trumpet sonata that got published and was premiered by future Canadian brass trumpeter Ronald Rahm, a very sophisticated work, and a choral music that got published. And I stayed on to study with not only Halsey, but the great teacher and composer Ingolf Dahl. And when I got my doctorate, they hired me. And I was on the faculty, and I've been there all this time. Now, I was able to repay Professor Stevens for his graciousness to me and the opportunity. When he developed Parkinson's in his life later on, where his body was in a very, very bad state, he asked me to go to his studio to find scraps of paper on which he had begun certain pieces that he was unable physically to finish, and asked me to finish it for him in his style. I devoted 2 years of my life to that. So if you hear Halsey Stevens' 7th Piano Sonata, his Viola Concerto, his 4 Songs of Love and Death, his Venite Exultemus for choir and brass, it says, composed by Halsey Stevens and edited by me. Before Halsey died, he heard all these pieces. He could never tell where the seam was. And it was a way of repaying this great man for his... this is it. I was a late starter. And I should also say this for those composers listening, or artists of any kind. For all these years, I have simply done my work quietly, building up a body of work, writing pieces like the Midwinter Songs and poems by Robert Graves, the Madrigali, fire songs, and Italian Renaissance poems. And then when I hit 50, I wrote the Les Chansons de Rose on poems by Rilke, and one of the pieces, De Reton, became a worldwide hit.
Mm-hmm.
And
for good reason too.
And then multi opportunities for recordings, other works, and coincidentally at that time being appointed the composer in residence with the great Los Angeles Master Chorale, who premiered O Magnum Mysterium and the Lux Eterna. Mm-hmm. And then it has led to millions of sales of scores, over 200 recordings, etc. But this was simply doing the very best work I could quietly over these years, building up a body of work, and not expecting any recognition other than my satisfaction that I've done a good job on this, and have written pieces that make a difference for people. And that was my intent all these years. And the fact that all this has happened in the last 20 years caught me completely off guard. Mm-hmm. And I look back with a lot of fondness to those early days of simply sitting alone in a room, especially in Walden Island, where I composed a lot of this.
Yeah.
By candlelight on a $50 piano, trying to express myself musically.
That's not hyperbole. That is a $50 piano.
That is a $50 piano.
Was the experience of hearing that trumpet piece something that you sat down and thought up? It came to you, you structured it, you wrote it down, and then to hear it played and enjoyed by an audience, that must have been quite an elixir.
It was, and it was. I wrote for the two instruments I could play, thinking I could play them both, but the trumpet part became very virtuosic. They teach it at Juilliard. It's published by Le Duc in Paris, and it was one for me, and it's a very, very sophisticated work. And so I simply got to work very, very hard. Coming down here to Los Angeles, my parents were quite upset when I told them that I was going to come down to Los Angeles to become a, quote, musician, unquote. I heard no clicking of heels. In fact, my mother's parting words as I got into my 1953 Buick to drive south were these: when it doesn't work out, you can always come home and eat crow. And I told her, I have to do this. There's something inside of me, and all artists know this. You have to, look, he had it right. Campbell had it right. Follow your own bliss, especially when you're young. Take your risks. Go down, and if it doesn't work out, you're not going to look back as an old person and saying, why didn't I have the guts, the courage to put it on the line early on and explore when I could. So I came down there. I had no money. I lived in a shack that we called Wacky Manor in a very bad section of Los Angeles for 5 years, trying to develop my skills as a composer and learn as much as I could. And thank God that I was very, very well taught by the professors at the USC School of Music, and my fellow students there were very, very high caliber. And so it was a great gift to me all those years ago.
I expect people listening right now are not 15, 19, in their 20s. Maybe they're 50 and they know they have this gift. It's kind of bottled up inside, but they're bound up in fear of what people will think of them if it doesn't quite work, fear of being humiliated, whatever. What do you say to people who feel like they're in a template or a track that's become a rut, and they just hear that siren call to create art, and damn the consequences?
Stick with it. Stick with it. You may not get the recognition that you hope for or deserve. There are plenty of wonderful artists of all kinds that are not recognized, but they have the satisfaction of knowing that they have done their best and remain true to themselves. Forget fads. Don't worry about anything. Push ahead. But also, also be proactive. No one's going to knock at my door at my home in Los Angeles to see if I have an O Magnum Mysterium laying around. When that thing got premiered by the LA Master Chorale, I got copies of that from my publisher, Octavos. On my own nickel, I flew to the Chorus America convention in Seattle from Los Angeles. Now, Chords America is an association of professional choirs and conductors. And I simply went up there, picture this, going up to conductors, saying to them, "Hello, I'm Morten Lauridsen, I'm a composer, and I'd like to give you a copy of this setting of mine of O Magnum Mysterium." Invariably I got, "Well, thanks, buddy, good luck to you and keep it up," etc. And then I flew home. And shortly after that, this is before internet was a useful tool for everybody, the letters and the phone calls started to happen. "Dear Mr. Lauridsen, you may not remember, but you gave me a piece of music. I like this piece of music, and we are going to perform it. I thought I'd let you know." And I self-funded my first CD, the complete choral music of Morten Lauridsen by a very fine choir in Oregon. So I put myself on the line financially and artistically to get my music out there. And then that self-funded CD got a lot of airplay, and it got on a lot of best of the year lists. And the next thing you know, I get the appointment with the LA Master Chorale to be their first composer in residence. And the first thing they asked me, Marshall Rudder, who was president of the organization, asked me if I could write a piece for the Christmas concert upcoming, dedicated to his wife, and they had just gotten married. And I said, sure. And I wrote O Magnum Mysterium for them.
I want to linger on O Magnum Mysterium. You and I are very handicapped right now because we're talking about something so beautiful that unless we're listening to it, it's hard to give it shape. O Great Mystery. It's a famous setting, and the context is the animals observing the incarnation take place.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of the sweet spot. My daughter Mary Claire sings in a choir, J. Sarah, in San Juan Capistrano, and they did O Magnum Mysterium at Christmas time, and I'd never heard it. I'd heard it. I think I heard it just a single piano setting, and I thought it was very lovely. But hearing it with 50 youthful, fresh, earnest voices that sounded so exquisite, I had a hard time keeping it together. I was very emotional to me, not just because my daughter was singing it. There's something about that piece that grabs you by the lapels and forces you to stop and to pause. When you were writing it, were you aware that you were downloading something so... I'm starting to run out of words already. I want to say the word mystical or transcendent or something that instills hope. It's a very mysterious thing that you've tapped into with Luxatern and the others as well. Are you aware of it when you wrote that it was going to be lightning in a bottle in a way?
No, I wasn't. I'll tell you, O Magnum Mysterium, it's only a 6-minute a cappella motet, just voices. O great mystery and wondrous sacrament that animals should see the newborn Lord lying in the manger. O blessed Virgin whose womb was worthy to bear the Lord Jesus Christ. Hallelujah. Now those 2 lines of text have inspired composers for centuries. The setting by Victoria in the Renaissance is as fresh today as the day it was penned centuries ago. And it spoke to me, God's grace to the meek, and the veneration of the Virgin Mary. And I set out to take my swing at the bat, so to speak, on this piece. And I was heavily influenced by viewing a painting by the Baroque painter Zubran that is hanging in the Norton Simon Gallery in Pasadena. Now, for your listeners who would like to get my thoughts on how this painting in details influenced the pathway that I took to setting O Magnum Mysterium, I was commissioned by the Wall Street Journal years ago to write an article on this very topic because the painting was going to be loaned from the Norton Simon Museum to the Frick Museum in New York. And they said, will you please write a 1,000-word essay on the relationship of your setting of O Magnum Mysterium to the Baroque painting? And when it shows up here in New York, we will publish in the Wall Street Journal a reproduction of the painting, then we'll have your article, and then a link to the Los Angeles Master Chorale recording of that. And so I refer your listeners to that. If you go to mortenlauridsen.net, you will find it there in the articles, and you can read the whole thing.
I'll also link it at patrickcoffin.media. I'll put that link there as well. So two inputs.
You know what? I worked on that thing for 6 months. It's a very basic piece. Harmonically, I was writing for the great conductor Paul Solomonovich.
Yes.
Who conducted the LA Master Chorale for 10 years, who had his post as director of music at St. Charles Borromeo Catholic Church in North Hollywood,
where I was married, and I had the great honor of having him play the organ at my nuptials. So this is another providential overlay.
Now, Paul was a great expert on Gregorian chant, on the Latin liturgy, etc. So I molded facets of my setting, compositionally, of O Magnum Mysterium to reflect the high Renaissance, the directness of the harmonies there, the motion of chant, the kinds of positions of chords, all characteristics related to the Renaissance when I wrote this piece for him. But I spent a lot of time on this piece because I'm paring down to the most elemental music materials possible. My job in this particular setting was to write the most direct piece possible, setting those two lines of text, and yet have a profound effect upon the listener. That took a lot of extra innings, so to speak. For example, a small indication of the kind of things were vexing me at that point. The second part of the text, Blessed Virgin whose womb was worthy to bear the Lord Jesus Christ. Well, now look, if I'm setting music, I don't know if you can hear this. I'm at the piano right now. This is the way the choirs are singing. It's nothing but 1, 4, and 5 chords. I mean, it's the simplest kind of music material possible. But within that context, how am I going to portray the Virgin Mary's suffering for losing her son and bearing the sorrow of mankind? And I tried all sorts of possibilities on that. And finally, one night, lying in bed, I thought, got it. When you hear this piece of music, on the word Virgo, virgin, one hears the only note in the piece out of the key, a G sharp in the key of D, and it resolves into a minor chord, and it sonically puts a spotlight on that word, edifying its meaning. And it's right here. Then it builds up to an hallelujah. the kind of details that I got very much involved in.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
I felt, in answer to your original question, did I know something? I'll tell you when I knew something. When I heard the dress rehearsal of the LA Master Chorale sing this piece.
Mm-hmm.
I went out and I sat in my car for what seemed like a half an hour, saying to myself, what was that I just heard? Because it touched me very deeply. One can envision this in your head, as I played it at the piano and all that.
Sure.
But to hear it with the LA Master Chorale and to hear the blend of how the voices go,
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
how a lot of it shaped the piece, it just absolutely floored me, and it floored the audience at the premiere of that. Now there are more than 200 recordings of that piece out. And I should announce this to your audience, too, that the great violinist Anna Kiko Myers, the top Billboard classical artist recently, fell in love with this piece and commissioned me to write a version of O Mani Mysterium for her violin.
Wow.
By the way, it's a $16 million Jesu violin that was given to her to use. For orchestra, violin and orchestra, or violin and piano. Mm. And the premiere recording of that is coming out in September on I'm not sure the title of the album, but it's got Arvo Pärt on it and Ravel, and it was recorded by the London Philharmonia with Christian Jarvie and Anne. And so it's without words this time, but it's a new setting with orchestra colors and one of the great violinists in the world.
That's adding to a couple of things that are happening with you this fall. A tour in Europe, the huge. Did I read correctly? 1,000-voice setting of Lux Eterna at the Brandenburg Gate to honor the end of World War I.
This is what I've heard too.
That's going to be, that'll be massive. That'll be international television. I'll be very surprised if it's not snapped up by American TV stations.
Yes, that'll be next year. This year, in conjunction with the Deutsche Grammophon release of the Lux Eterna CD by the Chamber Choir of Europe, which is coming out, I think will be called Lux Eterna, the choral music of Morten Lauridsen. Deutsche Grammophon, one of the great labels in the world, of course. I went to Austria for the wonderful conductor Nicole Mott has assembled a group from 12 different countries called the Chamber Choir of Europe. And we all met in a stage in a hotel in a small town in Austria, where we recorded the Lux Eterna with a fabulous Italian orchestra, and then selections of a number of my pieces from the Madrigali, from the Rose songs, the complete nocturnes, the premiere recordings of Dana Joy's Prayer, and my newest setting of Neruda. And now you're mine. Nobody else. And so we're excited about that. So we're going to tour Germany for 2 weeks involved in that. Yes.
I sent you a few weeks or months ago a talk by Karl Polnack from the Boston Conservatory. It's a speech he gave several years ago to freshmen. I'll just read a little bit and get your take on it. He says to the incoming freshmen, the first people to understand how music really works were the ancient Greeks. He says this is going to fascinate you. The Greeks said that music and astronomy were two sides of the same coin. Astronomy was seen as the study of relationships between observable, permanent, external objects, and music was seen as the study of relationships between invisible, internal, hidden objects. Music has a way of finding the big, invisible, moving pieces inside our hearts and souls and helping us to figure out the position of things inside us. And then he gives a beautiful example. I'll put that link as well. Now, that's a profound and simple thought, that the heavens way up and out there are somehow intimately tied with our internal heavens in our souls.
Yes.
With music as the connector.
I certainly agree with that, and that was a beautiful speech, by the way. I'm glad you showed me that link. The O Mani Mysterium and the Lux Eterna, for your listeners, I have properties on a very remote island in the San Juan Islands of Washington State. This particular island's only 4.5 square miles. There are 80 people on it. Until we had cell phones, there was no connection with the outside world at all, save for a little packet boat that went off to deliver mail 3 times a week. No phones, no electricity, no running water, none of that kind of stuff. I bought an abandoned general store that had been abandoned for 25 years right on the waterfront of Waldron Island. And I moved in there with this $50 piano and a golden retriever and some hand tools and a sleeping bag and a cooking stove in 1977. And the roof was falling in and all of that. And I was on that piano right by the sea, surrounded by pristine beauty and the quietness of nature, that I composed the vast majority of O Mani Mysterium and the vast majority of the Lux Eterna and other works. And I found this need for quietness and silence as a conduit to my creative work. Very, very important. And I learned that, I think, on that lookout as a kid all those years ago.
Yep.
By myself in the quietness of nature. Can you imagine surrounding above the mountains for the most part, surrounded by the beautiful Mount Rainier and St. Helens and all that, and then trying to get into myself, but being inspired by a larger picture. And I think the larger picture is well represented in the Lux Eterna, don't you think? Because I wrote that piece about illumination and connecting with the divine. And I wrote that piece when I was going through a bad patch. I got the news that my mother was dying, and I went to those timeless texts from the Catholic liturgy about all, and I formed a group of them, all relating to illumination in some way. Yeah. And I found it a great solace to me.
And the sorrow is not totally stripped out. I think it's the slight dissonances here and there that make it so exquisite. There's almost there's a wounding quality to Lux Eterna. Do you believe that was somehow nascent in your sense of loss as you were composing it?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But it's a very uplifting work, and I have been so pleased to see this work. It is done around the world constantly. It's for choir and chamber orchestra or choir and organ. And my publisher says that on the average, there are 75 performances of that every year. Now, that's a lot of performances.
Amazing.
For a contemporary work for chorus and orchestra.
And you and I probably would not be having this conversation because you would not have written all of this beautiful music if you had had a cell phone on that lookout.
You're right about that.
With full distraction. Your students must marvel at starting each class with a poem rather than,
They love it.
And
I will always say, who's got a poem to share with us? And someone will say, I've got a poem by a guy named Frost, and it's about this. And, and then we talk about that, or I will find a poem to read. But I salute poets, the writers. There are so many contemporary writers, not only Dana Gioia, but Samuel Green on Waldron Island is one of our finest poets. Ted Kooser, living on a farm in Nebraska, writing the most wonderful poems. So many that I urge your listeners to read poetry. If you want to be touched by love poems, go to the 100 love poems that Neruda wrote his wife. I set one of them to music. It starts out like this. I said it in Spanish. It does this. And when I die, I want your hands upon my eyes. I want to feel the wheat and the freshness of your hands one more time. That's how that starts. This goes on to say, while I'm gone, I want you to live. I want you to feel the sand on your feet. I want you to feel the wind in your hair. I want you to feel the sun on your back. I want you to blossom into full bloom. In the meantime, I'm going to be waiting for you, and everyone's going to know the reason for my song. Now that's a sonnet, and he's got 100.
Right.
Read those sonnets to the person you love most and see what happens.
I'll put that link as well. There's a poet in New Hampshire I'd like to introduce you to named Nelligan, Brian Nelligan. Writes about loss and family, a lot of father and son stuff. Is very kind of rustic, not a word wasted, very kind of lean and simple, beautiful. Brian Nelligan. I'll put links in to the poems that you just mentioned. All your time there in that look at reminded me of a comedy writer named Jack Handy said once, where do forest rangers go to get away from it all?
Right. Hey, you know what? I'm not alone sharing that. There's a book out there called Poets on the Peaks. Jack Kerouac,
Okay.
Gary Snyder, they were also had the lookout experience. This was life-changing. I'm up there for 10 weeks. I'm a young man sorting my life out, looking out for the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. In the meantime, reading, studying, playing my trumpet for the coyotes, and trying to sort my life out. And I constantly, in my talks, am urging my listeners to seek out and find places of quietude so you can reconnect with yourself. Unfortunately, in this day and age, for all the wondrous things about mass communications and everything, it is distracting. It distracts from our inner self. Mm-hmm. We are constantly, doing this and that and losing touch with our inner self. We've lost a lot of other things. We've lost the ability to write letters.
That's true.
One of the great things I did with Dana Joya after we first connected was to write in fountain pen ink letters to each other for a solid year. Yeah. But to seek out places of beauty and quietness. And this is something, the idea of quietness is something we also have to fight for oftentimes in a major way. We're distracted by ambient noise. It's very distracting. Yeah. I led a charge at the University of Southern California to ban gas-powered leaf blowers from blowing leaf all over the place and putting what somebody's dog had for dinner last night in our lungs and distracting people from those people out. I went to the president of the university and said, look, why don't you use rakes or something quiet? People are studying. This is a place of contemplation, and we're being gassed to death by these things. Yep. Look at the operators of these. They're wearing earplugs and gas masks.
Almost full hazmat gear. Yeah, many a show here I've had interrupted by these noise demons.
Got a ban from the University of Southern California. There are other ways of doing it, but we have to. There are books out now. One of them calls Noise Pollution a Global Catastrophe. Mm-hmm. And so we have to seek out places of quietness to reconnect with ourselves. And so I urge that for all your listeners to try and do that in some way.
And I'm so glad to connect with you, Morten Lauridsen. I've learned a ton, and I so love your stuff. I want to send as much traffic as I can. Go to patrickcoffin.media and find out more about this great national treasure. Keep cranking it out. I know you've got things in the pipeline. I have a feeling you don't believe in the concept of retirement, which is a grace.
No.
And I hope to meet you at an upcoming concert in La Jolla, California.
That would be
this spring. Great. MortenLauridsen.net is that website. Subscribe, rate, and review. Go to patrickcoffin.media and find out more in the show notes. Morten, thank you so much. Godspeed to you.
Thank you, Patrick.
This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?